So, because I am blessed with an Amazon Prime subscription, I decided it was time to go through all of the James Bond series. In order, basically, all of the movies, from Dr. No to No Time to Die. I won't be doing the TV movie version of Casino Royale with Barry Nelson, or maybe I'll decide to throw it in there at some point, but in any case, I am doing all the movies, even the non-official or non-broccoli ones. I'm in this for the long haul. It'll probably take me a couple of months, but I hope you'll come along for the ride. So, here we go with Dr. No.
Blowing up in my face.
You'll live dangerously with the superbly resourceful James Bond. The explosive screen dramatization of the book that has entertained millions of readers. The exotic and tantalizing Dr. No.
You really have to put things in context when you go back and watch this one now, as of this taping, 60 years since it first premiered, because sure, a lot of the Bond tropes are put in place. Sure, it functions as a serviceable introduction to what this guy is and what he's about. But for the most part, there's a sense of you had to be there. Don't get me wrong, Sean Connery is cool as fuck. But one thing you have to keep in mind, nobody knew who the hell he was in 1962 when this thing first dropped. This is not only the first James Bond movie, it is, for all intents and purposes, Sean Connery's first movie as well. He'd had a couple of bit parts here and there, but this is the first time he was given a lead role. And I think it goes without saying that the pressure must have been enormous. James Bond may not have been a cultural icon on the level of Superman or Batman or Tarzan or any of the classic American-made pulp heroes. Even as he was kind of a big deal in England, since Ian Fleming's novels had made a big splash there. But sure, James Bond is now a cultural icon because of the movies that made him famous. And this unknown 33-year-old Scottish actor, who already needed to wear a hairpiece to resemble a traditional leading man, had essentially been tasked with making James Bond happen. That's the goal of this movie. Yeah, these books have sold very well in merry old England, but now let's turn this British spy into a global phenomenon. That's what this movie must and will do, and yes, it most certainly did. But it's something they consciously engineered and worked at to make happen. For instance, when Connery showed up to his audition, he was scruffy and disheveled, but something about his natural swagger impressed Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, who were producing the picture, and they decided to take a chance on the balding Scottish actor with the not quite yet as pronounced sibilant S. Director Terence Young then went on to essentially groom Connery. He took him out on London town and showed him the ways of gentlemanly prowess, how to dress cool, how to act cool, how to eat cool, drink cool, etc. And he did his job well enough so that when we first see James Bond on screen, about 10 minutes into this movie, believe it or not, well,
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
I mean, no two ways about it. That's just fucking cool. Even if you're looking at it with completely fresh eyes and free of cultural baggage 60 years later, you have to concede that is a great character introduction. We understand that this is a man who knows who he is entirely sure of himself, and is entirely confident that he can do and get and achieve whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And once you grasp that, you can easily understand how this guy easily seduced audiences in 1962, and they freely embraced this new screen hero, and as it turned out, the iconic movie star that brought him to life. So, okay, you can definitely understand how the character was able to impress right off the bat, but it's maybe a little harder to grasp what might have made the movie itself particularly special for people in 1962. And for this, there's a lot of apologizing on the level of please understand that most of this stuff was quote-unquote new. And still, it's a little hard to grasp how this relatively slow-paced thriller, with a kind of inconsequential plot, could generate much in the way of big-screen excitement. Like, no bullshit. Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, released several years earlier, is actually a better and more exciting and even more action-packed film. Why wasn't that turned into a 60-year-old film franchise? I mean, I'm kidding, of course. Not about North by Northwest being a better film, because of course it is. But Alfred Hitchcock is Alfred Hitchcock, and Terrence Young is Terrence Young, which is not to say the film is badly directed or poorly made in any way. This is absolutely an efficiently produced thriller. It's crisp and professional. It just doesn't have much in the way of style, let's be honest. You don't get a sense of much artistic personality here. It is a standard cinematic potboiler. What felt fresh were some of the individual elements, the nature of this hero, with the emphasis on sexual innuendo and conquest, and a general steeliness well suited for the comic book ethos, and yes, good use of location shooting in Jamaica, combined with some snazzy sets built at Pinewood Studios by Ken Adam, all of which give everything a certain sense of scale that made the film stand out somewhat in 1962, even as more artful films in the adventure thriller genre had already been made by more accomplished filmmakers. But for what it's worth, the movie looks pretty good, and they stretched the $1 million budget as far as they possibly could. Yes, even in 1962, $1 million were considered rather paltry for a major motion picture production, as this had to be. And yes, even as I claim that North by Northwest is arguably more exciting, it bears mentioning that this is still a James Bond movie, which means it has a couple of set pieces, sure, and it does climax with an elaborate series of circumstances at the villain's top-secret underground lair, topped off by naturally a pretty good explosion. I guess one reason I keep getting stuck in this one detail is that we've come to expect big, elaborate action as a kind of given when you're discussing James Bond as a film franchise. For better or worse, the franchise kind of went on to set the gold standard for what the modern action movie was supposed to provide, and then eventually began assimilating whatever pop culture zeitgeist was prominent in any given era to suit its own ends. My point is, you take that into account, and this movie seems very quaint. The plot at first glance isn't particularly over the top. It's actually pretty straightforward. An operative has mysteriously disappeared in Jamaica along with his secretary, and so the British intelligence agency sends their top guy to find out what happened. So it's kind of like a noir detective story in some ways. It even has femme fatales and double crosses and all that stuff. And as this kind of set the template in formulaic terms for the film series that was to follow, it's interesting to note that James Bond took its cues more from detective fiction and film noir than it did adventure serials and pulp comic books, which is what it ultimately turned into. Which again is not to say this movie doesn't eventually get there, because of course it does, but it seems to take forever to do so in comparison with what you may be expecting. But make no mistake, this does eventually become the 1960s spy thriller movie that Austin Powers made fun of. In fact, if you remember that first Austin Powers movie, in many ways, they seem to take at least their aesthetic cues from this specific James Bond adventure. During the third act, you keep waiting for Dr. No to ask for $1 million, and you expect the scene where James Bond flattens a henchman with a steamroller going at 1 mile an hour while the poor henchman just stands there screaming. But no, none of these things happen, and if we're being totally honest, the climax of the movie as a whole just feels kind of uninspired. It's not bad, it's just kind of mechanical and rote, and is, as I've been stating, one of those things where you have to remind yourself to keep looking at the movie in context and accept that sure, back in 1962, all this stuff seemed kind of mind-blowing. Something else that was mind-blowing? Ursula Andress as the first official Bond girl coming up out of that Jamaican beach in that now classic bikini in a shot that must have had the masses drooling in '62 but seems kind of quaint now, much like the movie itself. But yes, of course she's beautiful, of course she is. There's not much to her character. I think she's supposed to be a local, certainly someone who grew up on the island, whose father was a marine biologist or something, and Dr. No eventually killed him or something, whatever. I don't think it really matters, and it's worth noting that Ursula Andress doesn't even show up until about an hour into the movie. It's one of the several little details, along with the lack of a traditional action set-piece cold open, or extended animated credit sequence with a theme song, or big centerpiece gadgets or special vehicles. It's one of the details where you see this is definitely the first James Bond movie. It feels like a pilot episode. They hadn't quite gotten all the details in place just yet. I mean, for fuck's sake, when Q comes into M's office, his big contribution to Bond's arsenal is to switch out his standard Beretta for the Walther PPK. That's it. I mean, whatever, I think at this point they really expected you to look at this as a serious and realistic espionage thriller rather than a comic book adventure. There are some bits and pieces along the way that date the movie, of course. This is worth mentioning only for historical annotation purposes, not out of any desire to be polemic or complain about anachronistic inappropriateness. But sure, it is weird to see Joseph Wiseman playing a guy who is supposed to be Chinese based on the background info they give you, then later you find that he's actually half Chinese and half European. So, okay. Kind of like Sean Ono Lennon, I guess, but in any case, they still put makeup on Wiseman's face to make him look Chinese, so I don't know, but it's okay. It's a reality of the times. Besides, Wiseman portrays the title character as a sophisticated, brilliant, and erudite mastermind, not a prancing Mickey Rooney caricature. It's okay, and in any case, the movie remembers to be shockingly racist in other ways.
Where's my shoes?
You see what I'm saying? And to make matters worse, not only does Bond treat his black sidekick like a disposable razor, that black character is painted as such a blithering idiot that he thinks the big green tank that shoots fire and has been painted by the bad guys to look like a dragon is an actual dragon. I suppose this is mitigated by the fact that Ursula Andress, who is as Aryan as the night is long, also believes this. So maybe their point is just that Jamaicans are stupid, no matter their ethnicity. Look, there's no point in complaining about these things anymore. What's done is done. All that's left to do is enjoy the movie as a reasonably entertaining historical document and an inception point for a franchise that would go on to deliver plenty of pleasures as well as missteps along the way for the next 60 years. What's my final verdict on Dr. No? It's fine. It's an okay spy thriller that passes the time, but it's probably noteworthy today only as being the very first James Bond movie. Were it not for that specific connection, I don't think you could honestly say that this movie is any kind of classic. Hey, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please give me a like and subscribe to my channel and share the video. There's going to be some cool stuff coming to the channel, so you're going to want to keep track of it, and I hope you like all that stuff too. See ya.